Welcome to the Earthen Grove, a gathering place to wander the intricacies of nature while forging connections from our minds and bodies to the ecosystems around us. I'm herbal practitioner Austin Seibelts, and I'm happy to be joining you today as we explore the Grove. Welcome back to the Earthen Grove. I'm very glad you could be joining us here today, and I'm very excited to be diving into our next subject of natural wellness and herbs for those of us who live in urban settings. Now, I encourage you to grab a nice warm herbal tea, a herbal tisane, as we dive into this subject today. And you might be asking yourself, why specifically are we diving into natural wellness for urbanites? And there's a multitude of reasons for that. The biggest one for me is that I find that for us who are living in urban settings, a lot of times there is a difficult disconnect between our own minds and bodies and the natural world. When I was living in San Francisco, I found myself craving a connection to a natural environment. And I find that these practices, and particularly these herbs, can really help to bring that back into our lives on the daily, even if we're somebody who can't necessarily get out of the city into a forest or a natural setting, but rather bringing that to ourselves so that we're still experiencing it and still experiencing that life that comes from those herbs. It's a great way to reconnect with nature if you're somebody who's in an urban setting. Beyond that, however, 70% of Earth's population currently lives in an urban setting. Of course, each environment you place yourself into is going to have a unique property that it has on our own bodies. But with urban settings particularly, we find that there's some drastic and oftentimes common patterns of disharmony, patterns of illness amongst the general population within these settings. There's a lot of different research that's gone into this. In fact, I have an article here titled Urban-Associated Diseases, Candidate Diseases, Environmental Risk Factors, and a Path Forward. As with the last episode, I'll leave links to these articles in my bio. It'll bring you to a page on my website with a whole list of the articles mentioned in each episode. In the article, they discussed evidence for urban association with allergic, inflammatory, and mental disorders. And they found that one of the biggest drivers for these particular patterns of disharmony were air pollution, but also altered microbial exposure, social anxiety, and general overstimulation, partly due to things like noise pollution, light pollution, water pollution, and then also with all those toxins, with all that stress, a harder time on our liver, on our cardiovascular systems, and on our guts as well. And with that, they found that disease transmission, cardiovascular conditions, respiratory conditions like asthma, and overall imbalances to mental well-being were quite common in these urban centers. From my own experience of when I was in San Francisco, I actually experienced some of the worst gut health that I've ever had in my life, and with it, some of the worst anxiety that I've ever had as well. I particularly turned to herbs to help support me through this, as well as a few natural general practices. Now, before we can continue, I have to, as always, mention that I'm not a doctor, I'm an herbalist, and any information that you gather here from the podcast should be further researched by you. Ask your doctor if you have any questions, and before you go and put anything into your body, whether it's coming from the earth or from a lab, know what you're getting yourself involved with there. There are a number of different practices that you can really get into to help support yourself through these different patterns of disharmony, whether you're somebody living in an urban setting or not. And of course, identifying the root key of your problem is going to be your ultimate solution here. Sometimes that's obvious in your environment, and other times it's not. But one thing that's important to remember is that you are a reflection of the environment that you're within. And so we can work towards improving our own home environments, our own job environments, to really increase our overall well-being. And that's going to be things like air regulation. This one's near and dear to my heart because I actually have asthma. So if you're somebody who's living in a polluted area, working with your air quality can be really supportive here, using things like HEPA filters, for instance, which help to purify that air. But you can also grow houseplants as well. Houseplants naturally purify the air on a more minute level, but they do purify the air. And if you get more houseplants, you get an abundance of them, it's going to stack exponentially for each plant. Snake plant has a lot of research on it for being a wonderful plant for purifying the air. Great thing about plants is they also are going to release oxygen into the air as well during the daytime, but it is important to note that they release carbon dioxide at nighttime. So you might want to keep them in the living room rather than in your bedroom. And then also, depending on the species of plant, they might release aromatic constituents into the air that are wonderful for relaxing our nervous system. This is where our essential oils come from. Diffusers and essential oils can be a really wonderful way to also improve your air quality in your home. With diffusers, if you get an ultrasonic diffuser, it's not only going to release a little bit of humidity into the air, but because of that fast rate of vibration, it actually reverses the ions of those water molecules, meaning that it's got a negative charge. So it's going to attach to positively charged things like dust particles, smoke, and different toxins that might be in the air. With that, it helps to carry them down to surfaces. Of course, adding essential oils into these diffusers can be absolutely stellar for our overall well-being as well, doing things such as relaxing the nervous system. Many essential oils are also wonderful for the cardiovascular system, such as things like jasmine flower. And also with things like eucalyptus or with tea tree, they are also mildly antimicrobial, so they can be diffused near your houseplants to help prevent parasitic infections, while also improving your overall respiration. Growing your own food is a really wonderful way, even in urban settings, to really begin seeing where your food's exactly coming from. You're getting it fresh, you're putting exactly what you want into that soil, exactly what you want around that plant, so you know the quality that's coming out of it. And it also gives you that opportunity to interact with its symbiotic bacteria here, while also just getting closer to the growth of life. Next week, I'll actually be diving into apartment gardening and urban gardening particularly. So I won't go too deep into this right now, but there's a lot of different options that you can grow even indoors, such as microgreens. Make it really easy to just have a nice addition to your salad, to your sandwiches, whatever it might be. And for the most part, microgreens grow extremely rapidly. With chia, for instance, you can have a crop within just a week. Of course, everybody knows that movement is good for our body as well. In urban environments, it's important to remember that with movement, it actually helps to begin detoxifying our body. Our lymphatic system requires movement for it to work properly. It's a mechanical organ system that has a valve system within it. And so as we're moving, it's helping to push debris, toxic debris out of our cardiovascular system into the lymphatic nodes, where it then can be detoxified through the skin. A good amount of light to moderate movement can also help to begin detoxifying the liver. 30 minutes of movement, you can begin releasing glutathione, which in the liver helps with detoxification. And beyond that, however, it also helps us with sweating, which is going to naturally have some of these toxins coming out through the pores. Now, a regular mindfulness practice can also be extremely supportive for really anybody who's going through stress, anxiety, depression, sleep disorders, but really particularly overstimulation, as it gives us an opportunity for one, to once a day just turn inward, relax a little bit, ground ourselves, whether this be through meditation, reading, a warm shower, and just taking a moment to find your sense of calm. I have an article here titled Meditation and Its Mental Physical Health Benefits, and that's on ncbi.com. In that article, they mention that there's several health benefits from meditation, including improving the immune system and inflammatory processes by decreasing cytokine, which is an immune signal. It can actually begin to increase our inflammation within the body. Meditation can actually help to improve that. Beyond that, it gives you an opportunity for a little bit of alone time, which can be great for anybody who's in an extremely packed city. And then it also is a wonderful moment for us to practice deep breathing, which naturally helps to reduce our pulse rate and improve overall respiratory strength while relaxing the nervous system and improving digestion. So really, these mindfulness practices are multifaceted for what they can do for our minds and bodies. And then, of course, ultimately, if you're somebody who's looking for that connection to nature once more, taking a little bit of time whenever possible to go and forest bathe in either an actual forest or potentially just a park setting is a wonderful way to help our minds and bodies reconnect. Now, in case you don't know what forest bathing is, it's essentially the practice of allowing our senses to take us away into a natural setting. So using your sense of sight, your sense of smell, your touch, taste, all that good stuff while you're in a forest to really just allow your mind to be kind of more childlike for a bit and just explore. And while you're doing that, you're breathing in oxygen from the plants around you, volatile oils as well. You're in a green space, and also you get these natural sensations and patterns becoming a part of your subconscious mind while also being covered in plenty of biodiversity that can help to increase our overall well-being within our bodies. Beyond that, it's also a great time to get a little bit of sunlight, and vitamin D is known for improving our serotonin levels. So really wonderful for anybody who might be going through anxiety, stress, depression. Now, I'd like to use this as an opportunity to shift gears into herbs and practices for unique patterns of imbalance within your mind and body and different ways that we can work through that. And it's important to remember as we're working with these plants that they aren't just a medicine. they're a living being that has many different types of interactions with many organ systems throughout our body, and it's an opportunity for us to connect and interact with that plant on a deeper level. Most of the constituents that we extract in herbal medicine are what are known as secondary metabolites. Now, secondary metabolites are a type of constituent that plants use to interact with their environment and communicate with other species. So, for instance, flavonoids are what give yellow flowers, orange flowers, that bright coloration that attract pollinators. Within our own body, flavonoids interact with our cardiovascular system and have an antioxidant property. And so we can look at these plants as communicating with our bodies, communicating with our different organ systems, and vice versa. Also, if you're somebody who's new to working with herbs in this kind of way, or if you find yourself feeling overwhelmed by this topic, I encourage you to start small, start slow, and choose a category of herb that really resonates with you. Start with 1 or 2 herbs that you can get to know within your own body for your own unique needs. We'll dive deeper into analyzing each individual herb in our Plant Profile podcast, which is staggered between the Earthen Grove. Let's start by discussing herbs that we can work with alongside mindfulness practices to improve our overall mental well-being. So the central nervous system can either be in a parasympathetic state or a sympathetic state. The parasympathetic nervous system response is a state of rest and digest, meaning during that time, our bodies are focusing its energy mostly inwards on our own organ systems. So our gut is releasing digestive juices like pancreatic enzymes, bile, saliva, while also improving peristalsis, moving food through the gut. It also is a time when our pulse comes down and our immune system oftentimes relaxes with it. The sympathetic nervous system response, on the other hand, is that fight or flight response, which I'm sure many of you already know is there to keep us out of harm's way. So in nature, when we would see like a rhino or a bear, obviously the fight or flight response is necessary because it moves us into action. What ends up happening is it increases our pulse and our blood pressure, pushing our blood out to the further reaches of our limbs, creates a state of hyperfocus, and it halts all digestive processes so that we can focus energy on getting ourselves out of harm's way. In an urban setting, there's a lot of different triggers that can cause this sympathetic nervous system response, such as loud vehicles driving by, low rumble of the city in general. You might find yourself dodging traffic. And so we can work with what's known as nervines to help relax our nervous system and to nourish our nervous system. Nervines are a category of herb that really hit multiple different actions. For instance, there are nervine stimulants like coffee, but on the other hand, there's many nervine sedatives, hypnotics, nervine trophal restoratives, which we'll be focusing more on today. Let's start with nervine sedatives. We have things like linden flower, lemon balm, vervain, chamomile. Nervine sedatives are a category of herb that is a gentle relaxant, oftentimes gentle enough to use throughout the day for things like anxiety, stress, general uneasiness, but can also be used at the end of the day to promote sleep and improve overall rest. These herbs are commonly and classically used to relax a frazzled nervous system. Linden flower particularly is an herb that is wonderful for relaxing not only the nerves, but also the cardiovascular system. And I'll dive more into that in just a moment here. It's a also very nourishing herb with many minerals in it that you can use as a delicious tea. It's one of these herbs that's slightly moistening to the body with a demulcent property, while also being cooling and relaxant to the smooth muscles. Lemon balm, on the other hand, is going to be a really unique nervine sedative in that it also has a mild euphoriant property. So lemon balm is oftentimes turned to for people who are going through emotional turmoil alongside their stress. So this could be things like melancholy or mild forms of depression where you need a little boost alongside your mindfulness practices to really help bring you out of the blues and essentially get yourself back on your feet. The combination of that euphoriant property plus the nervine sedative property makes it wonderful for those who go through anxious depression and really need some support during the workday or wherever you might be. Lemon balm is slightly drying to the body. It is cooling and it is also relaxant again to the smooth muscles. And then the other great thing about nervines is that many of them, particularly the aromatic ones, tend to also be carminatives. So what happens is these volatile oils that create the aroma of those plants mildly irritate the mucosa in the gut, and it causes the digestive system to increase peristalsis of the gut. So start moving the food through your digestive system. And for those of us who are oftentimes anxious, if you're somebody who, again, is fight or flight all the time, carminatives here with nervine properties are going to be wonderful. And then you've got nervines that are also cardiotonic, which many of them help to relax the heart, bringing its pulse into a more steady state, and oftentimes strengthen the cardiovascular system overall. Those are things like lindenflower and hawthornberry. Now, for more extreme cases of anxiety, and for those of us who have a hard time sleeping, particularly if you're somebody who has a hard time kind of shutting your brain off at the end of the day, that's where nervine hypnotics can come in handy. Now, I do have to preface this by saying that nervine hypnotics should be used in a safe manner. For one, you don't want to use them when you're operating heavy machinery or doing anything that could pose potential risk if you're drowsy while doing it. For two, these herbs should not be relied on for sleep because your body can become adjusted to working with nervine hypnotics and have a hard time sleeping without them. The first hypnotic that I'd like to discuss is known as valerian, a very popular, very common herb turned to for sleep support. However, it is also extremely powerful in limited doses for anxiety during the day. In World War II in the UK, valerian was used during the bombing runs to help relieve extreme anxiety. As I mentioned with these nervine hypnotics, you do have to use them safely during the day. And so if you're working with valerian for extreme levels of anxiety, you can use it in a slightly reduced dose. And this is, again, where you need to do your research and dive into what might be the proper usage for you. It might be best that you use valerian as a diluted essential oil, for instance, rather than as a tincture or a tea. Valerian is warming, relaxant, and drying. Another excellent hypnotic to turn to here is skullcap. Now, skullcap is unique because it's also a nervine trophorestorative, meaning it nourishes the nervous system, which we'll dive into here in a moment. But for that, you would have to have it prepared as a tincture, whereas if you want to use it for the hypnotic property, you're going to want to turn to it as a tea. The tea has a lovely spicy flavor to it, and it's often turned to for those of us who are extremely sensitive, so easily frazzled, or perhaps you're somebody who goes through pain easily, emotions come to you difficultly. Skullcap's going to be a great option to turn to here. It is a more warming herb. It's also going to be relaxant and drying as well here. So similar energetics to valerian. The great thing about both these hypnotics are that they're also what's known as a spasmolytic, which is something that helps to relax our smooth muscles. By doing that, you're helping to relax the bronchioles, you're helping to relax oftentimes the gut as well. And so these herbs overall are deeply relaxing to the mind and body and can be used also for people who experience migraines, tension, that kind of thing. And for those of us who really are triggered by the sounds of an urban setting at nighttime, you might use them in diluted forms combined with a slightly less powerful nervine like chamomile. Now, as I mentioned, nervine trophorestoratives are absolutely wonderful for anybody who's really trying to turn to an herb to re-nourish the nervous system, which essentially works by helping to rebuild the myelin sheath of the nervous system. And by nourishing the nervous system, you're preparing it to withstand things like stress and burnout to protect your overall vitality and strength of the nervous system. So really wonderful for anybody in a high-stress environment. Some examples of some very effective nervine trophorestoratives would be things like milky oat seeds, which you have to get tinctured fresh because the latex inside of it, when it dries out, it basically becomes rendered less soluble in alcohol, rendered basically useless for the body. So you want to get milky oats seeds fresh, tinctured. And you can find these at apothecaries. You can find them likely at this point in even some supplement stores and maybe even a few grocery stores. But with milky oat seeds, they're wonderful for regenerating that myelin sheath particularly. And then another great example of a nervine trophorestorative would be lion's mane, which is absolutely stellar not only as a medicine, but also as a food option too. Wonderful in stews. It goes great as like a seafood alternative. It's also wonderful for nourishing the nervous system and is known for supporting cognitive function. So both these herbs are nourishing and moistening to the body. They are going to be on the cooling side of things and the relaxant side of things. Great herbs to turn to if you're really trying to build up that nervous system and kind of soften some of the blows of everyday life. And then for more extreme burnout, there are herbs that are known as adaptogens as well. However, I want to do a whole separate podcast on these in the future because they're so versatile in how they work. And with adaptogens, they really need to be used with particular care. Essentially, the primary action of an adaptogen is that it helps in one way or another to support us with energy and balancing out stress. So adapting us to situations, essentially. But because of that slightly uplifting, energetic effect, it is often abused by people who want to push themselves despite their bodies and minds really needing to rest. So I'll do a separate podcast on this entirely, but I will give a few examples of some adaptogens you can do more research on that are absolutely indispensable from my own apothecary. And those are things like shatavari. I love shatavari. It's a wonderful herb that is nourishing, moistening to the body. So wonderful for the lungs, wonderful for the digestive system. And it's also going to be absolutely wonderful as an oneirogen, meaning that it helps to bring a little bit more focus of our subconscious mind to the surface. So this increases likelihood of dreaming. It increases our focus of subconscious mind while meditating. In fact, that's one of its traditional uses was as a meditation herb. And then beyond that, it's also wonderful for women in every stage of their reproductive cycle, as it's also estrogenic. I've read that it's oftentimes used for hot flashes as it's cooling, moistening, and relaxant as well. So great herb to know about. Another great one would be astragalus, which is also an immune modulant. So you can use it for an overreactive immune system. If you've got like inflammation from things like pollution, for instance, astragalus is going to be supportive there in helping to limit the inflammation throughout the body. Because of this, it also does need to be used with care because you don't want to use this during a infection, for instance. You don't want your immune system to be tamed during an infection. You want it to be like full throttle. And then one last one that is actually really lovely, again, is lion's mane. Lion's mane is an adaptogen here, more mild in its adaptogenic properties. That nourishing effect for the nervous system, its property in increasing cognition, and also the density of its nutrients make it also wonderful for supporting energy levels. So great adaptogen there, very mild adaptogen. Now let's take a little bit of a shift of our focus towards adapting our bodies to be more resilient in places that are, again, high with pollution and with microbial activity and things that generally might cause inflammation. So first and foremost, you really want to be protecting your body from pollutants, from toxins, from things that oxidize your cells. And so, of course, antioxidants are absolutely great here. You've got classic blueberry. Really, most berries tend to be rich with anthocyanins, which are great as antioxidants. Hawthorn again comes up here as an antioxidant that's protective to the cardiovascular system. But beyond antioxidants, we can also turn to demulcents, those moistening herbs, the mucilaginous herbs that I told you about earlier, because of the fact that when you use mucilaginous demulcent herbs, they're coating our respiratory systems, again, with a thin layer of mucus. That helps to catch particles and pathogens that are going into our body, into our respiratory system, namely, which at that point, the cilia of the respiratory system carries that up and out. So these mucilaginous herbs are wonderful for helping with clearing the respiratory system. And plus also our mucus has white cells in it, which are essentially going to be supporting our immune system there. So you're getting this layer of immune protection there. What gives them that mucilage is what's known as a mucilaginous polysaccharide, which is polysaccharides are fairly common in the plant kingdom and in the mushroom kingdom. Mucilaginous polysaccharides are particularly ones that hold a lot of water. They draw in a ton of moisture by creating osmosis. And so we want to soak these herbs oftentimes for at least an hour. These are going to be things like chia seeds, which are great also as a wonderful fiber plus source of magnesium. And then also you've got marshmallow root, known as the great moistener. Marshmallow root is a wonderful tea. It's a nice kind of mild, kind of sweet, ricey type of flavor. And it's just wonderful as an addition to a tea blend with things like shatavari again. And then another really common mucilaginous herb that's particularly wonderful for the respiratory system is mullein. And it's commonly known these days as the kind of the respiratory herb, right? I've even seen advertisements for it on TikTok, but it grows all around the world. Really, it's easy to find. It's easy to harvest. It's wonderful as not only a mucilaginous herb, but it also is very spasmolytic for the bronchioles particularly. So it helps to relax things like asthma. And it also helps as an expectorant to clear phlegm up out of the respiratory system, especially like really stuck phlegm. basically pull out that nasty shit out of your body, basically, and clear it out through coughing it up. Supporting the liver here and taking some of that load off in an urban setting can be really, really supportive to help overall well-being, but particularly to reduce the potential for damaging the liver from toxins entering the body and overall helping to process these toxins quicker, more efficiently, and removing them from the body. When it comes to detoxifying the liver, sulfur support is going to be a really wonderful way to naturally cleanse that liver. And so with sulfur compounds, it essentially stimulates the sulfation detoxification pathway, which is being eliminated through the bile channel of the liver and the gallbladder. Now, the way you can get some of these sulfur compounds would be in things like brassicas or alliums. Raw brassicas contains glucosinolates, which help to stimulate that sulfur pathway. These are a sulfur compound. Alliums, on the other hand, are both rich with sulfur compounds, but also support methylation. And so these are going to be things like leeks, shallots, garlic, onions. Other great thing about alliums is they can be used as more of a medicinal extract. So you can turn them into, for instance, honey extracts, or you can turn them into a syrup, something that you would essentially concentrate so you can use it in smaller quantities and support the body with a regular habit of using them. And then bitter herbs are also going to be really supportive here. So bitter herbs are going to naturally support an increase of bile release or production, depending on the herb. And by doing that, you're going to help to cleanse out that, not only the liver, but the gallbladder, and help to support further detoxification. Now, if you've never heard of bitter as like an herbal action, you're probably scratching your head thinking, is this just a flavor? And actually, it's both. It's technically both the flavor of the herb and the action. So bitter herbs obviously taste bitter. And one of the main ways that they work is that when our taste receptors pick up on bitter constituents, they essentially cause our body to begin detoxifying itself by releasing bile, enzymes, saliva, all kinds of stuff to help with breaking things down in the body and processing them through, and essentially cleansing ourselves out. This is why when you drink a hot cup of coffee, a lot of times immediately after you need to go to the bathroom, it's because it's a bitter herb that's acting on our gallbladder, acting on our liver. So further than just detoxification, these bitter herbs can also support with the breakdown of fats within our digestive system and overall processing of foods. Most bitter herbs tend to be cooling and highly drying to the body over time. And so we can turn to moistening herbs and aromatic herbs to help with relaxing the digestive system and coating it with a mucus layer. Some examples here would be things like dandelion root, which also has a nervine stimulant property, meaning it can be used for a nice little bit of uplift and a nice coffee alternative in the morning. So great for starting the day off with some detoxification and with a little bit of some energy there. Some other great options are thistle. Thistle is going to be a potent hepatoprotective. So it's not only helping with detoxification, but it's also helping to protect the liver as well. And then another great option, if you want something that's both an aromatic and a bitter, is that if you leave chamomile to steep for longer than 10 minutes, it often starts to get more of a bitter flavor to it. So it's going to have a nice relaxant property on the digestive system while also providing that bitter property as well. But then what if you're already inflamed from having all of this pollution around you? Well, that's where immune modulants come in, like astragalus, but also antihistamine herbs are wonderful here too. And there's a more limited number of antihistamine herbs. It's not a common property amongst herbs to actually block histamine at its source. But a couple great examples would be things like one that's really accessible from the general Western public, pineapple. Pineapple has bromelain in it, which is a acid and enzyme that helps to limit histamine release. And so if you're eating pineapple regularly, that's going to help to support that. Plus, also it's delicious, as I'm sure many of you know. But then also another great one here would be nettle leaf. Nettle is commonly known as the herb that stings you, except for not necessarily. If you get them while they're young, or even if you just get the ends, the tips of the herb, a lot of times you don't get that sting. But even beyond that, what happens is if you dry it, that sting becomes rendered no longer effective. And then also if you cook it down, it also becomes rendered ineffective. Nettles, especially when fresh, can be used as an antihistamine, but it's also a superfood. A lot of people like to use it in salads, like to use it in really anywhere you'd use any, like a green, like you could put it on sandwiches, tacos, all kinds of good stuff. It's nutrient dense. It is also diuretic, meaning it helps to cleanse toxins from the body by cleansing water from the body. Because of that, however, it is also extremely drying. It's a drying, tonic, and cooling herb. And so you do want to be careful with the way you use it. You want to drink a lot of water while you're using it. But partly due to this detoxification process, as well as its antihistamine property, it makes it wonderful for limiting inflammation. Ironically, it's a remedy unto itself. Nettle leaf, when it's fresh, if you get it at a certain age and you touch it, it stings you, creates a histamine response. But then when it's dried, it actually has an antihistamine response. And we'll dive more on nettles for sure in the future. Finally, we can work with cleansing our lymphatic systems of these toxins and of cellular debris from oxidized cells and from microbial activity. You can actually use lymphagogues as an herb. These are going to be things like calendula flower. You can also use something like sweet clover. Now, sweet clover is really easy to grow on a balcony if you're in an urban apartment. And it also is beautiful. It's got a beautiful flavor, a beautiful red flower that comes up with it. And it's going to be a mild, sweet herb that helps to cleanse the lymphatic system, especially, again, tied in with movement here, where you're cleansing your body due to the mechanical action of the lymphatic system. So, as I'm sure you could tell, these herbs are all multifaceted in how they work with our body and how we can connect with them. And so this becomes incredibly important for us to look at the different patterns within our own lives to determine which one of these herbs we want to start working with, which herbs feel right for us. It might be that you have difficulties with some of these problems, but then no difficulties with the others. For instance, perhaps you're somebody who has a lot of anxiety due to all the traffic that you go through every day, or maybe you have to walk to work and all these loud noises really get to you. And then maybe at that same time, you're having a little bit of some cramping and you feel like you're never feeling okay in the gut. And that might be where it's time to try out a nervine that is also a carminative, like lemon balm. Or maybe you're somebody who is prone to a lot of inflammation, a lot of allergies, or God forbid, an autoimmune condition. And that might be where something that's a little bit more of an immune modulant or an antihistamine might be proper for you here to really adapt your mind and body to that urban environment. If you've stuck with me this long, I thank you very much for listening through, and I hope that this information brings you a little bit of some wellness. Now, as I mentioned, next week we'll be diving more into urban gardening and how you can implement that into your own life for not only food, but also for some of these herbs we discussed today. And then if you have any questions at all for me, feel free to email me at theearthengrove@gmail.com. And then last, if you want to read any of those articles that I mentioned today, you can go to the articles page, which I'll link in my bio, and I will display all of those there for you. Take care, be well, and have a blessed rest of your day.